Cat.com production.
It is 35 degrees in Ames, 36 in Lawrence, 33 in Manhattan, and in Studio 73 here in Frisco, it is 44 degrees. This is the Big Insiders.
Welcome to the Big Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Hello, this is the Big Insiders, Big 12 Sports Show. What is going on today? Welcome back. Today we got our man Fitz. He's stepping in until we get, Payne Blazevich from Iowa State. We got Michael Swain. How's it going, Michael? How are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm trying to recover on some sleep after a late night covering a KU basketball game. Big Monday. It's finally back, but Thanks a bunch for having me on.
No problem.
And Big B, I appreciate you having me on. I was really good on this show. I'll be back at the end, but I was outstanding. But here's Payne.
Hello.
Hey, Payne, what's going on, my man?
Nothing much. How are you?
We are doing well. Thanks for stepping in and joining us today, man. Just talking some Big 12. Let's start off with basketball. KU played last night. I don't know. It's kind of a weird game. I think KU is a lot better than Cincinnati is. The game was tied at the half. KU ended up winning by 5. I know we talked a little bit off air. I just think that Cincinnati's tough, and I think that's what keeps them in a lot of basketball games. Michael, as you mentioned earlier, they're really tough, but when it comes down to it, I just don't think they have enough to be able to win a ton of basketball. I don't think that's sustainable, especially in this conference. If you can't score enough, I think it's a problem.
It is, and I think I think every Big 12 team has an identity, right, that they're able to rely on and lean on. And for Cincinnati, that's obviously rebounding. And they dominated KU on the glass. Like it was KU's worst rebounding performance of the season, out rebounded by double digits, now by 20 over the last 2 games combined for KU. But you look at the advanced numbers, right? And KU grabbed 40% or allowed a 40% offensive rebound rate. Like that is way too high. And it's the reason why Cincinnati was able to stay in the game, because in the second half, especially, they couldn't knock down shots, right? I think they had like a 5-minute stretch where they didn't make a shot from the field, but their best offense was getting to the free throw line, getting offensive rebounds, and just creating those extra possessions that eventually you're going to be able to convert on. So I think for Cincinnati, at least, I think it's a good team, but a team that I think needs a prolific scorer at the guard position, because they do have some good wing players. They've got a good front court, and it's just adding that, I think, the final piece to that puzzle to make them a much more competitive team in the Big 12. But for KU, I think you're right. It wasn't a great performance, but to some degree, I think in the Big 12 this year, there's not going to be a lot of great performances because the conference is so good. And when you look at what KU had to deal with in terms of a short turnaround, you play West Virginia. KU didn't get back till late Saturday night. They practiced for 30 minutes on Sunday, and then it's game day on Monday. So it's not a great amount of time to rest, recover. And you got to remember that KU does not have much of a bench, and they're playing their starters a lot of minutes. So these short turnaround games aren't huge help for KU, where right now you look at the rest of the week, they're able to get off their feet a little bit, practice a little bit more, and I think they'll be a much more energized team for Iowa State on Saturday.
Yeah, it's kind of what you saw. It's a little, I wouldn't say sluggish, but you could tell that, traveling, like I said, from West Virginia, getting back. I know coaches hate the quick turnarounds. They absolutely hate it. Players, not so much, because players, although they get tired, they would prefer to play and less practice time, but that's asking a lot when you're going from a Sunday, then a big travel day. I mean, you're not doing a whole lot. I mean, it's more scouting, walkthroughs, even in that 30-minute practice. So I get it. Payne, Iowa State this year, good basketball team. Play K-State on Wednesday. Kind of give us a little bit of lowdown for people that don't know or haven't seen that much of Iowa State this year. Give us a little lowdown on what's going on with that basketball team.
Yeah, so within the first couple of years of the TJ Otzelberger era, Iowa State's been a heavily defensive-focused team, not as much offensive talent, and that's come back to bite them at times over the past couple of years. This year, definitely a team with more offensive talent than Otzelberger has had before, but still not necessarily a team that can run, shoot for 40 minutes like sort of what they had against BYU, where they kind of got outpaced over the course of a second half. But when they bring their best defensive pressure, they can beat anyone in the country. We saw that when they beat number 2 Houston. We saw that when they went on the road and beat a ranked TCU team without Taylor Lipsey, who's by far and away their best backcourt player and arguably their best player on the floor. So whenever Iowa State gets an opportunity to get a fast start defensively, get those turnovers, and be able to get down the court in transition, then they can be a really, really good team. But sometimes when they're forced to play, more from the half court, the offense can start to stagnate just a little bit. But overall, Iowa State, tough physical defensive team, and it gives them an opportunity to win any game on their schedule.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. This league is just so crazy. I think a lot of people bagged on Big 12 football this year early in the season. And it turned out by the end of the year, it was like, not so bad. I don't think anybody's saying that about the Big 12 basketball conference. I don't think you're going to find anybody out there, Payne, that's going to tell you that the Big 12, it's not so good. Maybe, they'll have a couple of really good teams, but I don't think you're hearing anybody say that about this conference this year.
I think when you looked at the beginning of the year and looked at some teams that you might predict finishing towards the bottom, maybe a West Virginia or a UCF, something like that, they'll beat, your Kansases, they'll beat your Texases, they'll beat your top teams on any given night. And whenever you can beat a team at home, a tough team, I think you're going to see that all throughout the rest of this February and into March.
Yeah, that's the thing, Michael, is like, you look at a conference and you look at it from top to bottom kind of every year. And there's usually, like Payne mentioned, there's usually 2, maybe 3, sometimes even 4 teams that you're like, you know what, that's a win. We can go and we can win. Even when we don't play our best, we can go win that game. You don't see that in the Big 12 this year. It's like if you don't bring your A game, whether home or away, if you don't play, you're going to get beat. This conference is just that tough.
Yeah, I think it was maybe 2 years ago when it felt like there's like 8 really good teams that could all make the NCAA tournament. And then there were kind of 2 that you're like, okay, they're going to struggle to win games. And I think so far this year, Oklahoma State's been the only one that's been super disappointing. Watching them play KU the other night, it doesn't scream like a team that's fighting for their coach right now. I think that's something to watch over the course of the rest of this season is how much fight does Oklahoma State have, just because the team is not super well constructed. They're relying on some young freshmen who maybe in an ideal scenario would have more time to develop before they have to play a Kansas, a Houston, an Iowa State, teams that will ratchet up that intensity. But you look at the top of the conference, I don't know who would have predicted, that K-State, Texas Tech would be in the top 2 slots, right, entering this part of the conference season where we're really now in full swing, right? Everyone's in their rhythm now, and things are going to start to really get going. And I think for me, the most fascinating part of conference play so far has been Houston, because I think everybody knows how talented they are. The numbers show it, the talent shows it, but there's something to be said for, I think, having the mentality to show up every night in the Big 12. Yeah. And I think for Houston, you look back to what they had to deal with, right, in years past, where maybe 2 or 3 games a year is kind of the Super Bowl for them, where now every single night, you go up to Ames and that is the biggest game because that's the game Iowa State is playing that night. You go on the road to play TCU, that is the biggest game they're playing all year because that's the game they play that night. Like, it's so different. And I think that adaptation for Houston is interesting. But then you look at teams like, BYU and Cincinnati, where there's been some ups and downs for them in the first part of conference play. And I think UCF for me has been the biggest surprise. I was not super high on them. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, right, every team has an identity, and UCF is great at turning teams over. I wasn't sure if that was going to be able to transfer to Big 12 play, but you look what they did to KU, what they did to Texas. They're a team that's you can't be counted out every night. Like, I think that's a great part about the new conference, where if you want to get to next year, we can. But for this year, the new teams that have come in that I think many people thought maybe they're not going to be great. Is BYU going to be good? Is UCF going to be good? Like, they're showing that they can compete in these environments, in these games. And that's just huge for the conference because every single night there's a really good game to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of what you mentioned about Oklahoma State, maybe not necessarily fighting for their coach, although K-State fans will say, hey, we played them on Saturday and they were sure fighting for his life. But I think the coach at UCF, they were fighting for Johnny Dawkins because it was super loud. I mean, his seat was flaming hot. And the next thing you know, they're reeling off wins here. And it's like, you know what? Maybe they need to take a step back is because these guys are playing hard. I think that's a huge difference. And also, Michael, you mentioned about Houston. I think you're right. Going from the AAC, from where they are into the Big 12, it's just going to take some time for them to get used to that and understanding that it's big time basketball. And I'm not downplaying the AAC, but it's not the same conference as the Big 12. It's just not. So I think it's going to take them some time, Payne, for them to understand. It's like you said, going to Ames. Well, yeah, that might be a big game in years past, but it's big in Ames because Iowa State's playing. That's just the difference. You go to Manhattan, then you go home and you play Kansas, then you go to Texas, then you play Baylor. It's just like it's a murderous row when you think about it, but it is what it is, man. This is just big time basketball.
It's what's made winning on the road so difficult is because the Big 12 has, for my money, the best top to bottom environments in the country. So every arena's packed, every arena's loud. And in Iowa State's case, every game is going to be very difficult because for a team like Iowa State, wins on the road are absolutely not guaranteed. They're a team that can give up some bad losses. They're a team that has lost to teams that they probably shouldn't have. And they typically compete right on the bubble. So that even more emphasizes the need for a great home environment. Obviously, Kansas is what it is. And just across the conference, the environments are incredible, even with some of these newcomers.
Yeah, one of the newcomers, like Cincinnati, like going to Cincinnati, that's always been just a great basketball environment. I'm really curious and really excited to see some other teams go into there because I don't think, when you don't have those kinds of teams in your conference and you're not playing them all the time, you don't get to see other avenues. That's why I'm so excited for the Big 12 and all the expansion that has happened because, again, it's like you mentioned, Payne, the basketball environments for each school. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And it's not a lot of wine and cheese crowds either. It's a lot of student section crowds, which to me, that epitomizes what college basketball / college football is all about. I get it. You need the wine and cheese crowd every now and then. You need those people. But the student sections are what makes the difference in a lot of these venues. And seeing that be a big part of what's going on these days, especially in this conference, is incredible. Speaking of bringing in some of the newcomers, like I said, next year, I mean, we can talk about that. It's fine. I see it only getting stronger. I see it only getting better. I mean, you look at it, and we'll get into football here in a minute, but just looking at the conference outside looking in on what's going to be coming in. I mean, you look at Colorado. Obviously, everybody's going to talk about Arizona. I don't know about Arizona State. I think Arizona State might be on the verge of making a coaching change there because I think they're a little disappointed in what Hurley has brought in. Just my assessment. I just think they may be on the verge of that. But what do you guys see? Is there any excitement as far as KU, Iowa State fans, as far as basketball conference and what the conference is going to look like next year?
I think for KU fans, they're pretty fired up to start playing Arizona. I think that's something that's really cool. You think about how successful Arizona has been as just a basketball program, period. You're adding another one of those sort of historic programs, right, to the Big 12. I think that's going to be really important. And look, the unbalanced schedule is going to take some time to get used to. Like, it's still weird for me to think that, KU's not going to play West Virginia again this year. Right. They're not going to go on the road to play Cincinnati. Like, that's weird. Right. And I think for at least me personally, I think KU fans would agree, like either hosting Arizona or going to Arizona would be awesome to have next year. And I think Arizona State's interesting because I think that as a basketball program can be successful. I think at this point in time, like, we know what Colorado is and can be. They'll be probably a middle of the road team in the conference.
Correct.
Not too high, maybe a little more on the bottom side. Utah, I have no idea what to make of them on basketball, but I think Arizona brings a ton. Arizona State, I'm just really interested in because you look back at what Hurley did earlier with having a guy like Remy Martin there. And obviously it didn't result in a ton of team success, but I think you can recruit people to go to Arizona State and have success. So I don't know if that's going to be with Hurley as the head coach or someone else, but I think these teams coming from the Pac-12 are going to bring just more competitiveness. Like, I don't think they're going to be bottom feeders, but I think they're going to be teams that are just scrapping every night. And again, kind of adding to that middle of the conference where a lot of these teams, right, I think you're seeing right now are kind of in that 500 range. And I think there's going to be a ton of teams like that in the Big 12 once you factor in a lot of these new teams.
Got it. Anything
I think from
go ahead. I'm sorry, Payne.
Sorry. I think from an Iowa State perspective, fans are obviously going to be very excited to welcome Arizona, especially in Hilton Coliseum. But I also think fans will be excited to have another team that is drivable, that fans can travel to, like a Colorado, where the arena is going to be packed, but also Iowa State fans can get out to another arena. Iowa State's in kind of a weird location within the conference where teams are drivable, but not everybody. So teams like Utah, Arizona State, it is what it is. But Colorado, I think, is something that fans are going to be really, really excited to get out to.
Well, the thing that I like is it's going to kind of what you mentioned, Michael. It's going to bring in a bunch of new rivalries. Rivalries are going to start. That they can't. I mean, all across the country, people are going to be talking about Kansas and Arizona. That's just going to happen. And I think that's a built-in rivalry that's going to happen. But I think there's going to be kind of what you mentioned, Payne, the Colorado and Iowa State. I just think some of these rivalries are going to be built in, and just to make it it's already the premier basketball conference in the country. I don't think anybody could even remotely dispute that at all. But even next year, it's just going to get stronger. It's just going to be, I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen it, because I'm under the impression, I think that the Big 12 can get 11 teams into the tournament this year. Now, they may not, but I think that they can get 11 teams into the tournament. I'm not sure exactly what the record is. I think it's right around there, but I think they can get 11 teams in the tournament this year, legitimate 11 teams. And so I just, it's just crazy to me to think about that. You think about what it came from, but then it's like, hey, we only had 10 teams and we were getting 8 in. And I go, and now we're adding these other teams. And we didn't just add a team. We added a Houston. I mean, one of the best teams in the country, and I'm not discounting. I mean, BYU is good, because I think BYU is going to end up being there at the end. It's just all this basketball crazy that's just going on right now. But 11 teams in the tournament seems wild, but I think it's legitimate. I don't know about you guys.
I think it's possible. I think, what I always worry about is the beating up on each other aspect of it, because I think the selection committee, look, they can say they look into strength of schedule and strength of record and the advanced numbers. At the end of the day, they do look at the record. And sometimes that number to the right of the win column can dictate a lot, even if it's not fair, right? I think you could argue in the past there have been some Big 12 teams that have been better than teams kept in the tournament. But because that Big 12 team had, 9 losses or just over the course of the season, right? Maybe they're not included because the other team has 6, or think, in that type of situation. So I think there's a possibility that can happen, but I think it's going to take some separation in the conference for that to happen, where an Oklahoma State, a West Virginia, maybe even a UCF, we'll see, has to kind of become a team that's beaten up on a lot just for that record to play out. And the uneven schedule thing too is really interesting, because there are probably some Big 12 teams then, that might have a better record because maybe they don't play Kansas twice and Houston twice. I think the schedules here are really fascinating, but I do agree that, like, the conference at face value is good enough to have 11 teams, because I think you can go up and down right now and list off 11 teams and look at some of the other teams probably mentioned as at large bids and say, yeah, they would beat them on a neutral floor. So I think there's a possibility, but I'll be fascinated to see how the schedules kind of play out.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking as well. It's just the schedule is huge, because it's just what you said. When you're going to match that up with other teams, with other conferences, they're going to say, okay, well, maybe you didn't have as many losses, but look at the strength of schedule. I'm under the impression, just by paying attention to college basketball for as long as I have, it's like, they look at strength of schedule, but they look at the win-loss record a lot. I mean, a lot. And there's many years that we can all look at it and say, how did this team get in with 14 losses and this other team with 8? somehow they didn't make it. What are we doing here? And so hopefully that'll be one of these years, because I have a feeling the cannibalism in the Big 12 is going to happen. And I think there's going to be some teams that are really good basketball teams that might get left out. But I don't know, Payne. I'm just hoping that 11 teams can make this conference or make this tournament. I'm sorry.
I've been the one that's pounded the drum that I thought there should be 9 teams in years past when it was a 10-team league. Obviously, that's a little bit outrageous, but I think size of the league gives an opportunity to get a lot of teams in. I also think you run into the factor of maybe a team that's on the outside looking in, runs the table, wins their conference. That type of thing could prevent 11 teams, but there's the number, like 11 teams at either 3-2 or 2-3 right now. It's just ridiculous. But by the end, I would be surprised if there's not maybe double-digit Big 12 teams in the tournament. I don't know.
No, I like it. I think that if they're doing it right and the season plays out the way that I think, and a lot of people think that it's going to play out, I think that getting at least 10 in makes sense. At least 10 is going to make sense. Now, again, anything can happen. We got a lot of basketball left to play. So anything can happen in the season. But for right now, it looks like that we're going to at least get to that double-digit mark. We're going to take a quick break here from our partners at Synergy Financial Partners. We will be right back.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning back in. So let's flip the script here and let's talk a little bit of Big 12 football. You know, I know the season's over, but let's dive a little bit into both teams as far as the transfer portal and what your schools are looking at. K-State doesn't look at it as much as other schools look at it. I mean, they dive in and they get certain guys out of there that they pull out of there, and they've been successful. The one thing that happened this year that was a little different at Kansas State, and I say Kansas State because, you know, I went to Kansas State and all that good stuff, is that they thought the sky was falling early on, and that hadn't happened at Kansas State where all these guys were leaving so early. That hadn't happened, and once the smoke cleared, it was like, oh, well, the same number of people left that left last year. They just left a lot earlier this season. So at both of your schools, and I'll start with you, Payne, at Iowa State, transfer portal, do they dive into it as much as they could, should, or want to? What's that look like at Iowa State?
Yeah, well, Michael, you know from your time on the beat, Iowa State is definitely not a team that will go heavy in the portal. It's a developmental program. The coaches really, really trust their ability to get high school kids on campus and develop them into all-conference players. That being said, when Iowa State does go into the portal, you'll get some impact guys. Most recently, Jaden Higgins from Eastern Kentucky, he's a wide receiver, came right onto campus and was an impact player, number 2 wide receiver, competing for number 1 wide receiver. So when Iowa State gets guys on campus, they can make an impact. Right now, they have a defensive lineman, Kennard Snyder, who's coming on campus, wide receiver Isaiah Alston from Army, who looks like he could potentially slot at least in a depth position, maybe getting into the starting lineup. They'll get an offensive lineman from Wisconsin. But for the most part, it's not looking like the portal is going to be a way where Iowa State's going to supplement their roster. They're a really young team already. They're returning a majority of their starters. So bringing in some guys for depth, but for the most part, they're not looking to get any huge playmakers from the portal.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense, especially if they're a developmental program. They believe getting the high school kids on campus and getting them there, developing them. But it says a lot about the coaching staff, because there's a lot of places that believe they are the exact same thing and kids still leave. So at Iowa State, it seems like if they're keeping the guys, you know, that hats off to that staff, because in today's age of NIL and all that stuff, you know, you get a kid on campus and if they don't play right away, it's usually, I'm out of here. You know, I'm going somewhere else where I think I can get an opportunity to play right now. So Kansas is a little different. I think Kansas, Michael, dips into the transfer portal. I don't know how much. And again, just to familiarize everybody within the Big 12 conference, what Kansas does, kind of break down what they do a little bit as far as football in the transfer portal.
Yeah, so it very much is year-to-year dependent. You look at this offseason, and KU has lost 6 players to the portal, and they've gained 6 players from the portal. That's because of the scholarship numbers that KU is at,
Right.
and the fact that they spent a lot of time and effort keeping the guys on campus that helped KU have a 9-win season. And so they didn't lose a lot to the portal. As a result, they don't have as many scholarships for the portal, so they only added 6 guys, who I can run through in a second. Now, in years past, there have been more. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, KU added 15 to 20 transfers, and last year was kind of more in that low double-digit total. KU is very much a program similar to Iowa State that wants to get high school guys in, develop over time, and then I think attrition is going to happen, right? Recruiting misses are going to happen. That's how it works. You're not going to hit it 100%. And so what KU wants to do then is go to the portal for those stopgap players, right? The guys that, okay, this evaluation of this offensive tackle did not work out. Okay, well, now KU needs to go to the portal to get an offensive tackle to replace that spot. So that's kind of how KU views it. This offseason, they did a pretty good job of being able to keep guys around. I think they really only lost 2 key contributors to the portal. Both are going to make a lot more NIL money than they were going to make at Kansas. I don't ever fault guys for that. You have a very limited window to make money in college football, and there's no guarantee you're going to go to the NFL. So I'm not going to blame guys for going and wanting to get paid. That's well within their right. So KU lost Gage Keys, who went to Auburn, and then Armaje Reed-Adams, who went to Texas A&M. Keys was going to be a defensive tackle who probably competed for a starting job next year. And then Armaj was someone that started at left guard for KU for most of the season. And so they went to the portal then and got a guy from North Dakota State, Javier Darrett, who's from Kansas City, originally went to St. Thomas Aquinas. He's a 1-year guy. He'll come in at defensive tackle. KU's still trying to figure out what they're going to do, maybe with another offensive lineman. And they figured out that, okay, we're going to get 2. And so they went and got Shane Baumgartner, a center from Division II. He was the Remington Award winner, so the best center at the D2 level. They got him on board. And then someone that, Payne's probably familiar with, Daryl Simmons from Iowa State, a guard who will come in, provide some depth. And then probably the headliner of the transfer class is Sean Hanukkah, who's also from Iowa State, someone that's from Topeka, really close roots, and gets to go home and play for KU for a final season. So overall for KU, it's been a pretty successful portal run so far. I think they still have some needs at defensive end and linebacker that the coaches will try and get filled before the enrollment period ends, but we'll see. And if not, that'll be filled during the spring. So far, I think it's been pretty successful, maybe like a B grade, so far for KU.
Gotcha. So another thing as far as both of your programs and both coaches always seem to come up with a job, some kind of job that comes around the corner, and it always seems that their name comes up. Chris Kleiman, same way, some job that opens up. And I always tell people, I'm like, look, number one, you got to be flattered, because if your coach's name is coming up in another job, it means he's doing a good job. That's number one. I said, number two, as the years go by, you should get more and more relaxed about it, because that means your coach is more comfortable in their position. I know Matt Campbell, his name came up. It seemed like every job in America, his name was coming up for a job, and he stayed, and there's something to be said for that. So I'll start with you, Payne. Are Iowa State fans, are they getting more comfortable with hearing his name out there and just understanding that his name is just going to happen? I know in the last couple of cycles, or maybe this cycle, it hasn't been as much, but are they getting more comfortable with just hearing his name out there and just say, hey, he's our guy, he's not going anywhere?
Yeah, I think for the most part, and he's going on, I'm pretty sure it's year 9, and I don't think anyone thought that it would get to this point where he might be coaching a decade at Iowa State. But when you see his name tossed around as a potential coach to watch, maybe on a hot board from just a national publication, I don't think Iowa State fans are super worried. His name was definitely in the mix. All 3 of these coaches were in the mix in this Washington search, at least to some degree. But I don't think that there was a ton of worry that Matt Campbell was looking to get out, was on the verge of getting out. His name's always going to come up for as long as he's at Iowa State and as long as he's succeeding. But I don't think that there is necessarily a major worry there.
I gotcha. And Michael, I know Lance Leipold, his name, I mean, heavy into the rotation this year. I mean, it was heavy last year, but it seemed like even more this year just because of the higher profile jobs that came open. Yeah. It just seemed, and to be honest, from the outside looking in, it seemed almost like, yeah, his name is up, but he's not seriously even considering doing that. Now, again, I could be wrong, but that's just what it seemed like. It seemed like more the national media was trying to force his name into a position than what maybe was out there. I think there was a little smoke and not very much fire behind all that.
Yeah, I think coaching searches are weird because I think depending on who you talk to and which side you're getting your information from, it'll be different. I think if you were to ask the Washington AD, hey, who was your guy all along? We say, oh, Jed Fish.
Oh, yeah.
Who's our guy? Whereas let's just play a theoretical game here. If Lance Leipold had played ball, right, with it for longer and said, oh, well, let's interview, let's talk, like let's get really deep into this, maybe he is the head coach at Washington, but that didn't happen. So I think it's always sometimes gets into a semantics argument of, oh, well, was he really the guy? Well, it's hard to argue, one way or the other. But I think for KU fans, like they now look at Michigan and say, well, if Jim Harbaugh goes to the NFL, the core three of the national publications, the guys that do a lot of the coaching search stuff, like they're going to mention Lance Leipold in the kind of first or second line of those kind of hot boards. So I think KU fans are getting more comfortable with it. Look, it's a very different situation for KU. I think KU fans are much more used to, oh man, nobody wants our coach. Like we have to pay our coach to leave, pay our coach to not work. Now it's someone wants to pay KU an exorbitant amount of money to have their coach come coach their school. So it's a very different situation I think KU fans are getting used to. But I think, Lance Leipold has said publicly, right, that he'll be back and working with KU this year, and he keeps telling recruits that same thing. So even if people want to link his name to Michigan, or even if, Leipold's agent wants to use it as more leverage, that's one thing, but I think he will be coaching at Kansas this season. And look, I think we're kind of at the stage here where does Leipold at his age with the landscape of college football want to go somewhere else and restart? Because he's been open about the fact that there are a lot of coaches that are not going to be in this for the long haul because of how crazy the schedule is, how much NIL and the portal are impacting things and making it really a 12-month-a-year sport where you are on the clock 12 months a year. So it's just a different challenge. And so for Leipold, I'll be fascinated to see what happens if Michigan comes open and what is said about that job. But I do expect Leipold to be coaching at KU this fall.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a great point of bringing up as far as coaches not being in it for the long haul, because the way that I look at it is the part that I don't like about the portal. Look, I'm a former player, so I think the portal is great, but there are aspects of it too that are awful. And the one part of it that coaches don't like, and it makes it tough. First of all, the timing of when the portal opens, they've got to change that immediately. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. But the part is that the coaches are having to recruit their own players again, and they have to do it every year. That's the part that I think wears on them. It's not the part that guys may leave, because the transfer, you could always transfer, but there were consequences for that. You had to sit out, so people didn't want to do that. But so that aspect is kind of been there a little bit, but it's the having to constantly recruit your own guys. And it's not just the offseason. You're having to do that all year long. Because again, spring can happen here. How many schools and how many teams are going to lose guys to spring? After the spring, guys are going to leave again. So you're constantly having to do that. And that to me is the biggest wear and tear on these coaches. It's not NIL, although it's a problem, and I'm sure it's worrisome and all that. That's not what gets on their nerves or is going to drive them out of the sport. What's going to drive them out of the sport is the constant recruiting of your own players. To me, anyway, Payne, from my aspect, that's what, especially being a former player, I think that would drive a coach absolutely out of this, because look, I've done my job. I got them here. They're playing or they're not playing. We're trying to develop them. And that's why I tip my cap to Iowa State, because If they're getting the guys in and those guys aren't leaving, again, everybody's going to lose 2 or 3 guys, up to 6, whatever. That just happens. It's the way it is. But to be able to keep those guys is, like I said, I tip my hat to them because, constantly recruiting your own players when you have to then go out and get high school players, that's just a nightmare.
Yeah, that was that was the number one priority of the coaching staff in the offseason. You had young guys flash like Rocco Becht at quarterback, like Jeremiah Cooper at safety, who was an absolute playmaker this season. You got a young talent in Dominic Orange at nose guard. Those are the types of players that Iowa State really had to work hard to. I'm not saying there were a ton of offers or they were maybe on the verge of leaving, but that is the talent that Iowa State has needed to retain. That's why they don't need to look at the portal a ton, is because they're able to keep those really, really young, talented players home and give them an opportunity to develop. But certainly, especially in a year like this past year where you look, a majority of your starting lineup is freshman, redshirt, sophomore. Those guys are looking for other opportunities. They suffered a little bit in the running back room. Their 2 top contributors entered the portal looking for other opportunities. But for the most part, yeah, that's been a major priority of the coaching staff, is keeping those young guys home.
It's good stuff. Looking forward to the future here. Coming into the conference, obviously everybody knows about Colorado and Coach Prime coming in. But other schools that are coming into the conference this year, well, let's just start with the schools that came in this past football season. The UCF, I think those schools got a little bit of a taste of what Big 12 football was about. I mean, UCF, they were, I would think, was probably the most successful. BYU up there, Cincinnati and Houston struggled. The other schools that are going to be coming in outside of Utah, I mean, Colorado, we'll see what happens there. I mean, they're trying to live in the transfer portal. We'll see how that's sustainable. I don't see how it is, but that's a different conversation for a different day, I guess. But some of the other schools, Arizona State, we'll see how that goes. What are your all's thoughts, and whoever wants to take it can take it, some of the other schools coming in and making an impact in the conference?
I think Utah is going to be one of the favorites to win the Big 12. You look at Cam Rising coming back. I don't know if a team had more bad injury luck this past season than Utah. You look at the amount of players that they were out over the course of the year. That's a better team than their record showed. And I think they're a team that has the physical edge that I think you need to be consistent in the Big 12, because I think we've seen before, right? You can have splashy offenses, but if you don't have the ability to control the clock or to control the football and not turn it over, that's a big issue. And I think Utah does those things really well. I'm fascinated to see what a program like Houston does, right? With Willie Fritz. I think he's a really, really good coach. It seems like they did lose some big players to the portal, but I think it's a good job that someone like Fritz, who built Tulane into being a really, really good team that can go and wax, right, and compete with USC in a New Year's Six Bowl. Like, I think Houston is a team that will be really interesting to watch going forward. But, as it comes to newcomers, like Houston for me is the one that should be competing at the top of the conference from the get-go.
Yes.
Arizona's got some serious money issues going on that I think is a big concern going forward. We'll see what happens with Dillingham and Arizona State. And then, Coach Prime at Colorado, look, he's going to lose a lot of guys after this next season. And that makes me wonder if this is a one and done type of deal for him, where once his son leaves, right, does he want to stick around? Like, that's something that I'd be thinking about long-term for Colorado. So I think the conference, it's really interesting, because I think in terms of football, there are good jobs here, but it seems like the timing of some of the additions here, with Arizona losing Fish, with Dillingham just entering his second season, how long will Kyle Whittingham be coaching? Like, these are good programs, but it feels like each one's kind of in their own inflection point of where they're at. And it makes it really fascinating to try and project this stuff, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, because I think there's going to be some more coaching changes at those schools.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. Go ahead, Payne. Go ahead.
I think that Deion Sanders at Colorado is, for me personally, the most exciting. And I think that whole team and program is exciting. I hope it's not just a one and done, because I think they're super fun to watch. And it still kind of blows my mind that we're going to see Colorado competing against some of these Big 12 teams. I think it's awesome. I also really, really like Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. He faced a tremendous amount of adversity institutionally with player availability, and he still had his guys bought in. He still had his guys competing against some of those top teams in the conference. So I think that with maybe a year or two, Arizona State's a program that you could look at as potentially trying to compete for a top spot in the conference. But those are two programs that I'm personally most excited for, but I think all four are going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the conference. Look, it doesn't get the national exposure in football that not the ACC, but the Big Ten and the SEC does. ACC is a different conversation for a different day. But it doesn't get the name recognition. But to me, I think it can compete if they just gave the Big 12 an opportunity to compete on the same stage. I think that the Big 12 can be just as good. I've said for years that the SEC is top heavy, that you have the same number of teams. It's always the same top 2 or 3 teams. After you get past that, then they're just like every other conference. And the Big 10 says that every single year. It's the top 2. You might throw Penn State in there. If you want to count Iowa, who doesn't play offensive football, if you want to count them as one of those teams, you can. I won't. And then the rest of them are just average football teams. So with a Wisconsin every so often. So I just think if they give the Big 12 an opportunity, and maybe this does, maybe adding more teams to it gives them a bigger profile on the national stage. Who knows? I know that we added a lot of West schools, and that tends to not get you the national profile as if you are adding Eastern schools, which is why I'm really interested to see what this ACC thing does. But we'll let that play out a little bit as the season goes on, and we'll talk about that later. So I appreciate both of you guys, man, for making the time today. We will 100% have you guys back. We really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Oh, thanks a bunch. Appreciate it.
No problem. We will take another quick break here from our partners at Synergy Financial.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right. Well, guys, thank you guys again for taking the time to come watch the Big Insiders. We're going to bring in more guests, the more the merrier, and just kind of keep everybody up to date on different schools, what's going on, what their avenues are, what they like and dislike as far as in the Big 12, what's moving forward. I do want to point out, obviously, I'm a K-State guy, got a K-State shirt on. The K-State women had a big win last night. I don't want that to go unnoticed. On the road without their star basketball player, beat number 13 Baylor on the road. Look, K-State's got something going on. And not to mention, if you're not paying attention to women's college basketball in the Big 12, you're missing out. Just want to let everybody know that, man. So if you're not paying attention, you need to pay attention, especially to K-State. Thank everybody for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you. Have a good one.
This has been a GoPowerCat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.